Anyway, guys, we got a great show coming up here. We're going to do something fun right now. We usually talk a lot about football, but, the NBA is coming up. It's time to start talking about basketball. I don't think there's any way start addressing what's happening in the room. And today I'm going to bring on what I consider to be an NBA expert. That's right, an NBA expert is about to join us. He formerly was a writer for Fox Sports, but now he's with us over at whatsonsports.com. His name is Lance Fernandez. Lance is in the house. Lance, how are you, buddy?
Doing good, John. I also learned a lot about winter solstice with Michael's explanation. But this I can guarantee the Rockets might be experiencing some winter solstice with the James Harden drama.
Oh yeah, listen, I got to be honest. I don't know what happened there. I usually have a pretty good firm control of the show, but it just went off, and he was like, "We're talking about Jupiter and Mars." I thought he was going to break out a blunt and start smoking it. I have no idea what was going to happen there. I pulled it back though, Lance. I got to give myself a little pat on the back. I might not be a fantasy expert. I might not be the best host in the world, but it got away from me, and I pulled it right back. Great to have you on the show. You've already touched on James Harden a little bit, but let's talk about these things that you want to do. You want to make five NBA predictions today, talking about the NBA season, which is starting up in just a few hours. The NBA season is coming up. We're going to do 5 predictions. Let's start with number 1 on the screen. It already says it. You think you know who the MVP is, huh?
Yeah, I'm trying to, or I'm willing to bet money that Luka Doncic will be the most valuable player of next season. Because First things first, Kristaps Porzingis will be out indefinitely. So that means that he will carry much of the load on offense for the Dallas Mavericks. Of course, he will have some help from his teammates, but he is undeniably the nucleus of the Dallas Mavericks offense and possibly the defense as well. So with that scenario, you can expect him to pad up his stats, to gain more of his numbers, not just in points, but also in rebounds and assists. And of course, voting MVP is not based on stats alone. As always, if you look historically, there's always a backstory to every MVP.
Yeah.
Russell Westbrook won MVP because he averaged a triple-double. Giannis won MVP because he was young and he's an international player. James Harden won because, well, he had a historically dominating season that year. And for
and the beard, he had the beard also.
We have to go back to Steve Nash early in the millennium because their offense with the Phoenix Suns was just exciting and dominating, and you couldn't give it to Shaquille O'Neal every year, even though the stats would tell you otherwise. So,
well, listen, with that argument, you're right. It's far more impressive to see somebody like a Steve Nash, who's 6'2", 6'1", white. Doesn't look very fast, doesn't look like an athlete really when you look at Steve Nash. And you see giant Shaquille O'Neal, who's 7'4", or 7'3", or however big Shaquille was, almost 300 pounds. Of course, he looks like the best player in the NBA. That's why Steve Nash wins, though. Steve Nash wins because he doesn't look the part. He just looks like almost like a surfer guy. So Luka looks like a basketball player, though. So what is Luka's thing?
Well, number one, NBA is always playing towards the international audience. They always want to capture that international crowd because they are in turmoil here in the United States, and they would like to get a lot of attention internationally, especially with what happened during the live streaming of the NBA games during the bubble. They gained significant increases in audience, maybe because of the viewership times have changed, more favorable to countries outside the United States. But they would like to bank on that momentum. And having an international MVP in Luka Doncic will give them rapid strides internationally. And not to mention, of course, if Lovely Glorioso loves Kelsey so much, who wouldn't fall for Luka Doncic with that kind of boy band looks?
That is true. Luka's a good-looking guy. He looks the part. And I think most importantly for Luka, he's going to have the ball in his hand all the time. And if you want to win MVP, you got to get the ball in your hand. And if you want to be the guy, you got to make sure you get a lot of touches. So I think Luka's going to have the ball in his hand a lot. Let's talk about your next prediction, though, Lance. This one really got me pretty interested. Tell me about this James Harden thing.
Okay, so as we have learned, James Harden was essentially the king of the Houston Rockets franchise for the better part of the decade. He was the one who was doing the travel schedule. He was the one in charge of the film schedule. He was the one in charge of everything, even personnel decision with the Rockets. So with that much control, and now you are installing a new management with Stephen Silas and a new general manager, that is trying to hold back some of the power that was already given to him, I guess they would have a hard time dealing with James Harden now than before, because someone who has given much power might struggle if some of those leisures, some of those privileges are taken back. And let's face it, James Harden did have a lot of power in Houston. He
Yeah.
did bring them to 8 straight playoff seasons. But when it comes to titles, he hasn't shown anything. He has nothing to show for. LeBron James does have some privileges with the Lakers, but at least he has titles to show for, unlike James Harden.
Fair
So
enough.
as the season goes by, I guess this drama, much like the winter solstice, will become darker and darker and darker. There will be longer nights. And I guess that eventually the Houston management will snap up and will eventually give in to James Harden's request. Hey, bring me to Brooklyn. And of course, the price would have to be steep. So they are getting good players, Dinwiddie, Kyrie Levert, Jarrett Allen, who can be building blocks for a new playoff team in Houston. And of course, they wouldn't settle for that. They would rather have more draft picks aside from these 3 players from Brooklyn.
Yeah, to me, the NBA is broken. It's just a broken system right now because the players have been given so much power. And when you look at somebody like a James Harden, I mean, listen, I'm certainly not criticizing James Harden for his ability to score a basketball. I mean, the guy's probably one of the best NBA pure scorers in the history of the game. I can't play defense for a lick and doesn't really try. But the guy can definitely score the basketball. I mean, he is a shooter beyond shooters. But you're right. You bring up a great point. You give a guy like that all this power, and what has he really done for the game? He can score the basketball. That's fine. But what has he really done for the game? What has he really done for the team? Have they won any NBA championships? Have they won any? Have they gone to the finals at all? I mean, this is not a team that you look at every year and say, wow, they're going to be the team that's going to be the one to beat. You look at them and say they're going to go to the playoffs and they're going to fail. And when you give somebody like that power, I think you stay in that circle. It's a bad relationship. Maybe it's time for them to break up. Let's talk about your next prediction for the upcoming NBA season. You're talking about Michael Porter here.
Yeah. So there has been a lot of consideration on who will be the most improved player for next season. I also considered OG Anunoby of the Toronto Raptors, given that Serge Ibaka and Marc Gasol are already out of the roster. So that would give him more playing time and a larger responsibility to the general scheme of things for the Toronto Raptors. But that said, I guess that it will still be Michael Porter Jr. who will win most improved player. He has to step up now because his honeymoon period in Denver is over. He has been injured, yes, but he has shown some glimpses of greatness during the bubble for the Nuggets. And now that he might step up to a starter role with the likes of Gary Harris and Jamal Murray, he has to contribute in a larger scheme of things. He has what it takes to become a versatile player. He has a knockdown shot from the perimeter. He can score at will. He can create offense for his own. And it's just a matter of time that he will put his game all together and become the most improved player for the season.
I think it's about consistency for a guy like Porter, but I will say I like that Denver Nuggets team. I think it's a very interesting team. They've got some very interesting pieces. And I'm actually excited to see if they can kind of put it together and make a little noise out there in the West. Let's talk about your next prediction here. Wow. That one popped up on the screen and got me a little bit. I think we jumped ahead one, but you're talking about the Lakers here?
Okay, so let's jump into the Lakers. Everybody did adjustments for their squad. Everybody made roster adjustments. For all we know, even the lowly Atlanta Hawks can make the playoffs in the Eastern Conference with Bogdanovich and Gallinari in the fold. And of course, they have Rajon Rondo who can provide stability off the bench. Or if Trae Young sucks up and doesn't play to his standards, there's always a Rondo as an insurance policy. But that being said, I guess the Lakers will still win back-to-back titles. They did make some improvements as well with their roster. They have a Montrezl Harrell who is a spark off the bench. They essentially retained everybody. And they now have an Anthony Davis who is more confident after winning a title. LeBron is still a force. Let's face it. After 18 years in the NBA, he's still an unstoppable and versatile force. Yep. And you combine that with a more confident Anthony Davis, a confident sixth man in Montrezl Harrell, and an offensive-minded point guard in Dennis Schroeder, who can also light up the scoreboard. Then all indications will lead to the Lakers winning back-to-back titles.
Yeah, look, it's hard to argue. I mean, to me, LeBron James is probably the most unstoppable force in the NBA, and when you look at that team, Anthony Davis is actually better than him, which is to me scary as hell. Lakers got the best chance to repeat. Let's talk about your very, very last prediction. You're talking about sixth man of the year here. Tell me something, Lance.
Okay, so sixth man of the year. I would give my vote to Jordan Clarkson of the Utah Jazz. He had a strong preseason with the Utah Jazz. And looking at the roster of Utah, he will definitely be the first person off the bench for Quinn Snyder, barring any turning back the clock from Derek Favors, which I'm betting against. He has been solid in the preseason. He will be the spark off the bench for the Utah Jazz. And he will be given more minutes because Mike Conley's situation or status is still up in the air. We don't know yet if we're getting the Mike Conley of old or the old Mike Conley. So if that happens, you would need to give more playing time to Jordan Clarkson to somehow be the point guard of the Utah Jazz, but more importantly, to bring more offense from the bench of the Jazz.
I got to be honest. No one loves the NBA quite like Lance Fernandez. He's one of our head writers over at whatsonsports.com. Lance, I want to thank you so much. You know, you're another one of those guys that every time you come on here and you start talking about basketball, I'm a basketball fan. I've been a basketball fan for a long time. Gone to a ton of games. When I lived in Miami, I went to a ton of Heat games. But no one seems to know basketball like you do. Like, you really study the game. I got to appreciate that about you. Lance Fernandez in the house. Now, Lance, listen, I'm actually going to keep you around. But I'm just going to shove you back into the green room for just a second here and bring you back out. Well, I talked to our friends out there really quick, and I want to thank everybody for listening today. It's always great to have so many listeners. We've got a couple hundred people, looks like, watching us on some different social media platforms right now. And of course, at the end of the day, this show will be downloaded by thousands and thousands of people on all of their favorite podcast networks. So if you found us somehow, I'd like to thank you guys so much for listening to the What's on Sports podcast. I remind you all the time that we do have a website. I don't want to talk about it too much. I just invite you to go over and look at it. It's whatsonsports.com. You'll find some great content over there. You can set an alert so that you can get all of our notifications. Every time there's a new piece of content that pops up, you can get it sent directly to your desktop so you always know when something new is going on. I also want to remind you that we do have a sponsor. And our sponsor today is Sports Trading Systems. We invite you at any time throughout the show or after the show to go over to sportstradingsystems.com and learn how you, that's right, you can break the chains of these bookmakers and your DraftKings and your people like that, your FanDuels that are taking your money every week. Guys, go over to sportstradingsystems.com and learn how to not gamble anymore, but to learn how to use sports trading lines just like other people trade stocks. You guys can go over there right now, sportstradingsystems.com, learn how to do what they do over there. Trust me when I tell you, it'll be well worth the trip.